Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Happy Thursday, best day of the week. Glad you're here. Yesterday, we talked about this woman, Robin DiAngelo. Remember, we were reading this op-ed from a woman from Cameroon, and she's like, I never used to believe this whole, Black Lives Matter narrative or whatever. And then she started to talk about, she started to use these words. I was like, oh, something. You've been reading someone, haven't you? And then later she quotes Robin DiAngelo. I was like, yeah, okay, that's where that is. So Robin DiAngelo is the person who coined the phrase white fragility. And she's created a nice business for herself, touring around and lecturing white people about how terrible they are. So in our effort to answer the question that I think we're supposed to be asking, which is, what do you want a white person to do? And I want to be clear, it's not this big cosmic, what do you want white people to do? That's not, no, don't give me that. Because that's such a ridiculous question. I'm not gonna be like, well, here's what I want black people to do. No, talk about an individual. What specifically do you want a white person to do? So Robin DiAngelo would be the person to ask, right? She makes a ton of money touring around pushing this white fragility that she coined in 2011. She wrote a book in 2018 about it. So she made this 5-minute video for this website called Big Think. You've probably come across a Big Think video before. They have 2.75 million subscribers, right? So the headline of it is, this is the paradigm shift that could stop racism. And I was like, this is perfect. I want to know what to do, and what's the paradigm shift that I need to be a part of to stop racism. Let's watch the video. Here's the first part.
The number one question I get when I give a talk is, okay, now what do I do? And that question has bothered me for a long time. One, to be really honest, I think it's disingenuous. I don't think white people really want to know what to do unless it's the most simplistic thing, which is just keep being friendly. That question tends to function as a way to jump over the hard personal work and just get to the answer or get to the solution. It's a little bit arrogant for folks who have never in their life thought deeply about this, and after an hour, they want to get the answer and go fix it.
Okay, so I am arrogant and disingenuous. Okay, that's a great way to start. Okay, that being said, what if I also want to know what to do? Right? So you say I'm arrogant and disingenuous, fine. But also I want to know what to do. What if Tuesday's blackout on Instagram really inspired me to, I really want to know what to do. I'm already disingenuous, but what else can we do here?
At the same time, we can't wait till we have it all figured out, right? And so I will offer a challenging question back, and then I will answer the what do we do. So my reply to that question is, what about your life has allowed you to be a full, functioning, professional, educated adult and not know what to do about racism? How have you managed not to know? Why is that your question? People of color have been telling us this for a very long time. So that question is meant to be a challenge. It's also sincere. Take out a piece of paper and start writing down why you don't know.
All right, hold on. Okay, so you're telling me, Robin, someone genuinely comes to you. You're the author of the book on white fragility, and someone wants to know what they can do to be a part of the solution. And the first thing you do is shame them? How could you not know? Right? What a ridiculous, imagine if you did this with anything else in life, right? So imagine if someone came to me and said, Slater, you talk a lot about the Bible on the show, you talk a lot about Christianity and Jesus. I'd like to know more about Jesus. What do I do? And imagine if I said, well, hold on, let me ask you a question first. How is it possible that you can be an adult human being and not already know what to do? Unbelievable. So why don't you just start with that and write down why you don't already know what to do to be a Christian, and then you get back to me. Right, imagine if I shamed you for asking a completely genuine question. And it could be literally with anything. Hey, Slater, I know that you are an expert epidemiologist. These last couple months, you've just been amazing at your epidemiologying. Slater, what is an R naught? And what if I came back and I said, all right, but first, let me ask you this. How have you been living? the last 3 months of this pandemic, and you don't know what the R naught is. I want you to go home and write down all the reasons why you're an idiot and then get back to me, okay? So every week we talk to Vince Racaniello, professor of virology at Columbia University. Every Monday I ask him stupid questions. Never once has he shamed me. Never once has he been like, wow, Slater. Okay, you know what? How could you even be so... Never once. Alan Dershowitz, we talked to Alan Dershowitz last Friday. And, I asked questions like, hey, Alan, what's, Alan, we're tight. Alan, what's, tell me about how the 10th Amendment applies to a pandemic response or whatever. He never went, wow, Slater, first, let me ask you, how could you be an adult and not, you with me? I've never been an expert on anything where I ask a question and they respond with shaming me. We talked to top historians and scientists and classicists and all these amazing, brilliant people. They never once have shamed me, except for this woman. That should be a giant red flag. Okay, so I'm disingenuous, I'm arrogant, and otherwise horrible, ignorant human being. So let's go on now. What should I write down, lady?
Probably on the first of your list is going to be, I wasn't educated on this. Step 1. 2, I don't talk about race. 3, I don't really have relationships across race, or not many. And when I do, we don't talk about race. 5, I haven't cared enough. There's your map. And when you get to 5, I haven't cared enough, if you can look at yourself in the mirror and say that, then carry on as you always have, but do it with honesty. If you can't look at yourself in the mirror and say, I don't really care, great. Use that motivation to get involved. There's so much good information out there. My website is filled with lists and resources. So probably the number one thing we could do next is take the initiative and go look it up. I use this analogy sometimes. If you went to the doctor and the doctor said, you have an acoustic neuroma, and then the doctor was called out on an emergency and left the room, and the meeting ended, what would you do? Go home and Google out of acoustic neuromas. Would you not? Would you watch every video you could? Would you get on every blog? Would you get on every listserv? Would you even get a different opinion than whatever the doctor had given you? Yes. Why? Because you cared. I think it says something really profound about white people that just taking the initiative to look it up is somewhat revolutionary for us, but it is.
Okay, all right. So I'm arrogant, disingenuous, ignorant, and I need to look it up. I did. That's how I found you, lady. I Googled it, and I found your 5-minute video, and you're telling me to look it up. And I found you shaming me. So what do I Google? All right, I think we have the last part here.
And I will never forget talking to a multiracial group and putting the question out to the people of color. What would it be like if when white people ran their inevitable and often unaware racism, you could give us feedback on that and have us receive it with grace, reflect on the behavior, and seek to change it? What would that be like for you? And I'll never forget this man of color raising his hand and saying, it would be revolutionary. And I just want my white listeners to take that in. Revolutionary. That's a pretty strong word for just receiving the feedback, reflecting, and seeking to change the behavior. That's how difficult we are. That's a revolution. That's also how easy it is, but we can't get there from the current paradigm. So work really hard to change your paradigm, and not only will your interpersonal relationships change, so will our institutions, because we will see that they do.
I just want to be clear. The title of the video is, "This is the paradigm shift that could stop racism." And the conclusion is, you need to shift your paradigm to stop racism. After, of course, you've been shamed and all the rest, and told to go Google it. What are we doing? How about that line, white people have their inevitable racism, inevitable. But what are you talking about? What paradigm shift? And how will it change? I need to listen to black people who say I did something racist, get feedback, and then reflect on it. Like, okay, that's called being a human being. We do that. We should do that with everyone all the time. Right? Like, hey, Slater, when you said this, I took it this way. What did you mean by that? Or I do it too. Like, hey, man, I said this the other day, and I thought about it again. I kind of like it didn't come out the right way, and I didn't mean for that to be offensive. Like, let me try to do that. I'm sorry, but right? Like that's called just being a human being. I got email the other day. I have a new manager on the radio show, and she said, "Hey, Mike, what's your preferred way of communicating? Do you prefer email, text, phone call? Like, what's your way? I just want to find the most comfortable way for you, for us getting in touch." And I love that. I thought that was so super thoughtful. And I said, letter. Send me letters. I don't want to talk to anyone ever. The only way to get in touch with me is letter. But isn't that thoughtful, right? So that's great. That's how human beings should talk to each other, like human beings. So this lady's big paradigm shift is you should be a humble, thoughtful human. But she started off saying being friendly is not enough. So I'm told I have to do something, not just me, white people have to do something. And I'll tell you, if something means bowing down to this lady and her demands, then no, I'm not doing that. Isn't it amazing that this academic could talk for 5 minutes and say nothing? At worst, she's covering up one type of racism with another kind of racism. The answer simply is to stop looking at people as different races. There's no such thing as race at all. We have to do a segment on this again, because it's been a couple of years actually. Race is to use their terminology, race is a social construct. Race is based on bad 17th century science. I'll give you the very, very short of it. I got the very, very short of it. We'll go through the whole history of this. But it may have been in the early 18th century, late 17th. And there was a scientist who took the skulls of, I think, 5 or 6 people from different parts of the world. One was from the Caucasus Mountain region. And he took their skulls and he filled them up with mustard seed. Filled up their skulls with mustard seed, and then measured how much mustard seed fit into different skulls. And the person from the Caucasus Mountain region had the biggest skull, and this idiot determined that, bigger skull means bigger brain means better person. And that was the Caucasus Mountain region, hence Caucasian. And it was the black person who had the smallest skull, therefore the smallest brain, therefore is inferior. That's how we have race. That's the beginning of race. The concept of race is that guy filling up skulls with mustard seed. That's the beginning of the concept of race. Just cut it out with that. Total nonsense. But we got race baiters like this making a ton of money off it now. That's why we have to keep even talking about it. That's why we keep even obsessing about it. Stop paying attention to women like this who make a lot of money to peddle it. That's where you start. That's the paradigm shift. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. I came across this line from a Black Lives Matter-y website. Actually, no, it was a white person. So it was like inspired by the Robin DiAngelo there, White Guild stuff. And actually, my wife inspired me to. She found this. She's been seeing this on social media a lot. This concept. So I found this line, and the person said, "You white people, you need to." So it was actually given to people. It was addressed to people who benefit from white privilege. So organizational leaders, that was it. Organizational leaders who benefit from white privilege. During these moments of trauma, it is a mistake to remain silent. Worse, silence is complicit in the injustice. And here's the line, white silence is violence. All right, white silence is violence, got it? But also, don't say anything. You need to listen. Don't speak, listen to the lived experiences of others. But if you don't say anything, that's violence. And then this person said, if you ask someone how you can be better, right? So if you as a white person go talk to a black person and you're like, what can I do better? Or you have a conversation, that's bad because you're putting the onus on them. And that's unfair. Here's this race baiter person. Don't expect anyone, any black person, to have to give you advice or thoughts or feelings. If they do, thank them profusely. That is a gift. That's not their job. It is extra emotional work and baggage. Therefore, be very careful when soliciting feedback. So I just want to be clear. White people, don't say anything. This isn't your time to speak. Also, your silence is violence. So ask me how you can do better. But if you do, you're oppressing me with all that extra emotional work, and you should know anyway. That's where we're at right now. I sense some inconsistencies. All right, I want to talk about this video from Chris Cuomo. You've seen it by now, but here it is.
Now, too many see the protests as the problem. No, the problem is what forced your fellow citizens to take to the streets. Persistent and poisonous inequities and injustice. And please, show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Okay. We'll just start with the Constitution. The Constitution says you have the right to peacefully assemble, so it's right there. But let's go deeper than that. So if you had to pick two models of how one should protest, I think Gandhi and MLK are two pretty good examples, right? So Martin Luther King Jr., the Reverend, was inspired by Gandhi, who was inspired himself by three different people in particular, which is pretty interesting. So there was a guy named Rajchandra. He was a Jain leader from India's late 1800s. One of his claims to fame was that he remembered his previous 7 lives, so he could speak to those 7 lives he lived before. But he taught Gandhi about nonviolence, and he was one of Gandhi's spiritual mentors. The other two inspirations I think are super interesting. So one of them is Leo Tolstoy. Leo Tolstoy wrote a book, The Kingdom of God is Within You, wrote it in the late 1890s. It was a Christian book about the importance of loving others. Tolstoy was amazingly influential in Gandhi's life. So Tolstoy wrote a book or a letter called A Letter to the Hindus. And Gandhi read it. I think he was in South Africa still at the time, but Gandhi read it and translated it to different languages to send into India. And it was advice from Tolstoy to the people of India on how to fight against British colonization. It's a relatively short letter. It's pretty quick to read, and it's a wonderful argument. And one of the key lines is Tolstoy said, love is the only way to rescue humanity from all ills. And in it, you too have the only method of saving your people from enslavement. Love is the only way to rescue humanity from all of its ills. It was Leo Tolstoy who said that, and that obviously very much inspired Gandhi and his life's work. And one of his arguments Tolstoy had was that to the people in India, he said, if you think you've been enslaved by the British, he's like, just get over that. The British, that's what he said. He says there's 30,000 weak, ordinary people, Brits, who have managed to subdue 200 million, by the way, now it's 1.3 million Indians, but at the time there were 200 million. 200 million vigorous, clever, capable, and freedom-loving people. So have the British enslaved you, or have you really enslaved yourselves? That was the question Tolstoy posed that inspired Gandhi. So this Jain poet, Tolstoy, and the third inspiration from Gandhi was a British poet named John Ruskin. And specifically this work called Unto This Last, written in 1860. And it was entirely about the parable in Matthew 20, which is the parable of the workers. The very, very short of it is, this guy goes to the market and says, hey, I need people to work for me. It's like noon or earlier in the morning. And the guys are like, we'll do it for this wage. Perfect. So then the guy goes back to the market a couple hours later, gets some more people, and a couple hours later gets some more people, and then gets a couple more people at like 4 o'clock. And then at 5, he starts paying everyone. The owner of the land does, and he pays everyone the same amount. And the guys who have been working all day are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We've been working all day. These guys have only been working for an hour. Why are we all getting the same pay? So that's what that book is about, that parable, Unto the Last. And the end of that parable, it says, Jesus says, so the last will be first and the first will be last. Again, another, perhaps the opposite is true, line. I love it so much. The last will be first and the first will be last. And Gandhi read that book and read that parable and said, that's amazing, that level of equality. And it changed Gandhi's life completely. So you have these 3 inspirations, right? I mean, you have the 2 greatest civil rights leaders in the world, like MLK and Gandhi, MLK inspired by Gandhi, Gandhi inspired by these three people, two of them Christian authors who got their authority from the Bible, which is pretty interesting. But that's what inspired Gandhi to live a life of love, nonviolence, passive resistance, and equality. Pretty amazing. So you can choose that approach, love, nonviolence, passive resistance, and equality. And we could throw in what we talked about yesterday with Martin Luther King Jr. talking about how his supporters and followers are willingly and cheerfully taking on the suffering, not giving out suffering to others, but taking it on themselves. So you can do that, or you can take the Chris Cuomo approach of, who says this needs to be polite and peaceful anyway? Now please, there's been people like Chris Cuomo and others making excuses for violent protest forever. It's lazy. It's lazy, it's intellectually weak. It's morally weak. It's easy. MLK and Gandhi both inspired their followers to a higher calling. And Cuomo's inspiring people to a lower one, which is just like our base norm. Right? I like this reminder. I just read it this morning before the show from Claire Lehman. She's at Quillette. She said, I'm watching what's going on in America and watching the fervent tribalism and the activism that looks like religion and the anarchy and just all the chaos. And it's easy to get all worked up about it and whatever. But she says, then I remembered that this is the natural state of humanity, this fighting and everything. Civilization is what's unusual. Same thing with Gandhi and MLK, right? Not polite and violent protesting, that's what's normal. Nonviolent, peaceful protesting is what's unusual, but that's what we need to be called for. So anyway, who said protest should be peaceful? It was a pretty good track record from MLK to Gandhi to men before him. Remember Gandhi or MLK yesterday? We quoted. MLK said protesting you have to be cheerful. That's the word he used. So that's polite, right? It's got to be polite and then peaceful. But what do they know? Or you're going to be distracted by the media. Tomorrow we're going to talk all about the media and how they're a bunch of hacks and manipulators, and we just got to cut them out of our lives completely. They're just the worst. Rich Lowry had a good line in relation to Chris Cuomo. He said, the old line from the media was that the protests are mostly peaceful. The new line is, who says protests have to be peaceful? And then Chris Rufo, one of our friends, responded with, the future line is going to be, actually, violence is good. See how it's going down? That's the natural path. Let's do better. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. Granted, this is a little bit of red meat I'm going to throw our way, and not super in line with what we were just talking about nonviolent, or not violence, not violent, but peaceful, calm, polite. It doesn't quite fit that, but I think it's worth playing because there are some good points. So this woman, she's from Africa. She's in D.C. She went to a Black Lives Matter rally the other day and just sort of went off on everyone. So again, I don't love the volume. I don't love the tone. It doesn't seem like this woman's interested in changing minds. I wrote a book a while back called How to Change Someone's Mind, which is very different than how to win an argument. Those are two completely different things. Sounds like this woman is interested in winning an argument. Very, very different than changing minds, right? But her message here is not anything you hear in the media, so I think it's worth playing. Here it is.
When black people kill black people, they don't come out and do this crap. The only time they do this crap is when a white person touches them. They're the racists. They are the racists. Because white cops, it's wrong for a white cop to kill a black person, that's for sure. But if it matters, it should matter at all times.
So what are you fighting for? What are you fighting for? You are not here to fight injustice. You're here to cause drama.
Message will be stop violence. It's not about blacks.
In a unicorn world. That's not a unicorn world.
Period.
Okay, since you're so...
You guys claim blacks are oppressed. I am black, I'm not oppressed. I am free.
That's good for for you. That's an individual person. What about a systemic issue?
Where? I am black. I've always wanted to be. I have like I do what I want. You have the skills. This is a country where you have the skills. You want to do what you want. You do it. Stop forcing on people to accept that they're oppressed. They are not. I am not oppressed. I am black. Stop making people accept that they're oppressed. You're forcing a rhetoric into their minds, which is not true. That's my point. Okay. Violence is wrong, period. It's not about blacks. You agree that whites kill whites too, right? Have you seen any white person coming out and saying white life matter or white thing? No, violence is wrong.
They literally do all the time. Every time there's a Black Lives Matter protest, a white person.
It's not a problem. It's a violence problem. The blacks kill blacks in black neighborhoods every single day. I've never seen a Black Lives Matter in those neighborhoods. Never. Never. You know what they say? When a black person kills a black in a black neighborhood, they come out and they say, when the police comes, do you know what they tell the police? Snitches get stitches.
I know that. Okay.
Snitches get stitches. But if a white person kills a black person, Black Lives Matter. Stop the hypocrisy. Nobody takes this seriously. Nobody. If it matters, it should matter in black neighborhoods. You start cleaning at home.
Let's play one more part here, mostly because I like her accent here.
Hey, yeah, we agree with you. Violence is wrong. In any way, on any surface of the earth, violence is wrong. But there's more violence in your own communities. What do you do about that? Are you going to come change violence at the White House? Come on, give us a break. The idea is to create a group of people who feel oppressed, okay? Because if the more they feel oppressed, the more they're going to look for some kind of equalization. Nobody's oppressed in America. Look, I'm a foreigner. First of all Americans, we're all foreigners, okay? If I'm hardworking, America's a country. Why do you think the entire world wants to come to our country? Okay? Everybody wants to come to America, and they want to pretend we're oppressed. I am not oppressed. I'm black. I'm not oppressed. I have a master's in healthcare administration. Okay, I'm going to be working for a federal agency. I am not oppressed. No black in America. I don't feel oppressed. I'll tell you that. If you're driven, you're going to accomplish what you want to accomplish. We're in the country of the free. Okay? And let the mainstream media stop trying to force in on people to accept that they're oppressed. I am not oppressed. I am black. I'm not oppressed. Okay? Trying to make some people feel oppressed is just to weaken them. That's the bottom line. You want to make this group of black people feel that they're weak and that there's some power on top of the. No one is oppressing nobody.
So one of our favorite quotes is Henry David Thoreau. There's thousands hacking at the branches of evil, to every one striking the root. So we always try to strike the root on this show, and I think that's what she's doing there with just the principled statement of violence is wrong, period. That's why we did that whole segment in the last segment about Gandhi, right? Chris Cuomo says, who says these protests got to be peaceful and polite? Well, MLK said they got to be cheerful. And then who inspired MLK? Gandhi. Well, who inspired Gandhi? Two Christian authors and that Jain poet. But the two Christians, well, specifically Tolstoy. So big picture about Tolstoy. Tolstoy wrote a lot about nonviolence, but like, he was an absolute extremist. Tolstoy said, all violence is wrong. Even self-defense violence is immoral and unbiblical. All right, that was Tolstoy's stance. All of it was wrong. I would argue, I think most people, that violence is wrong except for self-defense. So we can talk about that nuance right there, right? But that should be the standard, right? Violence is wrong. But of course, we can't have that. We got to break it down by race, and that certain people committing certain acts of violence against other certain people is more or less wrong, or all this other nonsense. This is ridiculous. Violence is what's wrong in every circumstance. I want to play a clip here. This is Rush Limbaugh. He went on The Breakfast Club. Breakfast Club, maybe the most influential morning radio show in the country right now. I think that's a fair statement to say. Charlemagne the God is the host. And Rush went on, and it was like a mind-blowing combination of worlds, and it was awesome. And Rush did a really good job of, for the first few minutes, saying, listen, I hear you guys. What happened to George Floyd was awful. It was terrible. It broke my heart. It made me sick. And he did a really good job with that. It was a 30-minute interview. Some of the other things that Rush did later was I disagree with, but I mean, who am I? I would have done a way better job than Rush Limbaugh. Anyway, he did in the end, he asked the question that we kicked off the show with, guys, what can I do? What do you want me to do? What do you want people to do so that you feel good and better about things? And here's Charlamagne's answer.
As long as there's a system of white supremacy, there will always be these type of situations. It doesn't matter who's in the White House if that person is not willing to dismantle the mechanism of white supremacy. If that person is not willing to change legislation that disproportionately impacts black folks, it doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying? Like, we've seen this a million times.
Okay,
The LA
tell
riots,
me
the
what
Ferguson
happened.
Riots.
You had 4 years of Barack Obama. You had Americans, white Americans, voting for Obama because they wanted to say we're not racist. We're not a racist country. You had people electing the first African American president in our history.
That's
he
right.
served for 8 years. Why isn't there anything to show for it that makes you less angry than you were then?
Once again, it doesn't matter who's in the White House if that person is not willing to dismantle the mechanism of white supremacy.
Come on,
It
guys.
doesn't matter.
Elections
It doesn't matter
don't
who the
matter
president
now?
is. I think that when we got to stop acting like white supremacy isn't done by design. The whole function of systemic racism is to marginalize black people. And it's very hard to get any damn near 80-year-old white man to change a system that's been working for him and his family for years. I don't care if it's Biden or Trump. So once again, we need people that are willing to dismantle the mechanism of white supremacy.
Or poison. We're going to talk to our next guest about that specifically too, but think about that as this super influential person, Charlamagne the God, saying as long as white supremacy exists, we will be oppressed. That position has way more influence and a way bigger platform than that random woman in DC saying, I'm not oppressed. I got a master's degree in health or public health or whatever, and I'm going to be working for this federal agency. Like, I'm not oppressed. What are you talking about? So the hosts, they talked about black oppression. And Rush said, guys, you are a testament to America. Like, how did you all become so successful? Like, you're living it right now. How did you have these opportunities? Do you remember, it was actually, I think it was University of California. I think it was the UC system. But it's a lot of these schools too, it's not just UC. But they sent out a list of all these things that are racist, all these words and phrases that are racist. And one of them is it's racist to say America is the land of opportunity. Remember that? It's racist to say America is the land of opportunity. But, I mean, look at that Breakfast Club radio show, right? Like what? Charlamagne himself, let's go even further. He wrote a book called Black Privilege. Opportunity comes to those who create it. He wrote it 3 years ago, wrote it in 2017. Wrote a book called Opportunity Comes to Those Who Create It. Someone wrote in the YouTube comments, they mentioned this book, and they say the book is about his life and things he's learned, and mostly it's about God and family and hustle and hard work and connections you make with insight and humility. Yeah, I know. That's how they became successful. Not white supremacy or whatever. Like, nothing's holding them back. No one's holding anyone back from doing those things like they did. So what's the problem here? This is an interview of Charlamagne from 2017, pitching the book.
Look at the word privilege. It has two definitions. One definition is, advantages granted to a certain community, but the other definition is an honor to be. And I think it's an honor to be in this black skin. I don't think that my black skin is a liability. I don't think it's a burden. And I just feel like we have access to a divine system that causes us that we can tap into, that causes us to prosper in spite of everything that's thrown at us in this country. So for me, I'm just trying to restore that feeling of like black pride, black excellence, black power.
Black excellence versus black oppression. How about more of that first one, Charlamagne? How about more of that message? Black excellence. What a completely different message to preach to people. And it was only a couple years ago when he was preaching that, and now he's preaching white supremacy. What a shame. We're going to talk to our next guest about that. Right here, true story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back. Really, this whole show, the last 3 segments, has been a build-up to our next guest, Joseph Pinion III. He's the chair of the Conservative Color Coalition. Mr. Pinion, how are you, sir?
Good to be here. Thanks so much for having me, Mike.
Man, good to talk to you. I just want to throw it to you first. Just where's your head at? Where's your heart been at with just everything of the last few weeks?
Look, I mean, I think, it's been a difficult week, I think, for most Americans and most people who just want to see justice and who just don't want to think they live in a world where a man could walk out of his house, no matter what he'd done or been accused of doing, and end up losing his life with a knee on his neck for 9 minutes, defecating on himself, screaming for his mother. It's a horrific scene, and I think it troubled me deeply. I think it really troubled a lot of Americans deeply, irrespective of their race or creed.
Man, I think every single person. I can't imagine anyone. I haven't heard anyone try to justify what that officer did in any way.
No, I mean,
what about? Sorry, I was going to say, what about your reaction, or what's your thoughts on people's reactions to it? And obviously, it's a huge question because it's hard to paint broad brushes. There's been all types of reactions, but maybe what's been encouraging to you and what's been discouraging in people's reactions?
Well, I'll talk about three things, right? I think, I start with my father. Like I said, I was telling my father was born in Nolens, Louisiana. Like I said, in the era of Jim Crow, turned 18, wasn't allowed to vote. This is the same man who, literally had to flee Hurricane Katrina with nothing but the clothes on his back and an urn with my grandfather's ashes in it because that was all he could grab. And so I think, I spoke to him on Sunday and, I've said many times, he said that he thought he was reliving the worst days of his life in high definition. And I think that is a message that I think just needs to sink home with a lot of Americans because there are a lot of people of color just a lot of people of a certain generation who've already seen so much. And so for this notion that we've gotten to our golden years and somehow that a man could lose his life over a matter of $20, it just seems surreal to far too many people. On the flip side, I think we've seen a lot of good things that the media doesn't cover. We've seen people protecting law enforcement that got separated from their squad against mobs. We've seen people together kneeling in prayer of all colors and creeds. We've seen a sheriff in Flint, Michigan, bring the police to march with the people. And so I think that is something that we can focus on in this moment. That if President Trump is talking about the fact that the media is often lying, that they're also, again, portraying this false image that belies what the grand majority of the people are doing. That we know that most law enforcement go out and do a great job every day, risk their lives to keep us safe. We also know that most of the people across this nation have their heart in the right place, and the people who are protesting peacefully simply want to have what Barbara Jordan said, an America as good as its promise. And I think that if we can focus on those things, I think that that'll get us to where we need to be as a nation in this time of upheaval.
Amen. I want to get back to your dad actually in a second. I got a question about him, but let me ask this question to lead into it. We just played a clip of Rush Limbaugh, of all people, on The Breakfast Club. And it was a really interesting 30-minute conversation. It was really fun. And Rush at the end is like, what do I do? What can I do to help think? And Charlemagne went on this thing about white supremacy, and we have to dismantle white supremacy in this nation, and you know all this, like the 1619 Project, all that stuff. So do we live in a white supremacist nation? What is there to dismantle? Can you speak to that?
Look, I think we have a lot of people in entertainment because the news is becoming quasi-entertainment who like to use these phrases that make them feel good and that often sell a lot of books. So when you start talking about things like white fragility, a New York Times bestseller, when you start talking about people walking around saying things like, we have to get rid of this white privilege. I got a lot of people living in double wides all across that black belt in the South who don't feel very privileged, who are drinking the same drinking water that is not clean, who are dealing with the same type of sewage problems that we have in places like Mississippi and Alabama running freely in their backyards. So I don't think they feel very privileged. So I think there is a fundamental disconnect in what we're actually talking about. What black people are crying out for is just the opportunity to be treated equally, what Martin Luther King called to be true to what you said on paper. And so I think when you look at it from that perspective, as a black American, I think just as Americans as a whole, to say that we're just talking about devaluation, right? That being able to have clean drinking water is not a privilege. That's just the way it's supposed to be, right? Like, as I always say, that famous Chris Rock sketch, right, where he says, you know, people want a cookie for taking care of your kids. You're supposed to take care of your kid. Right. And so I think, again, you know, Americans, you're supposed to be able to send your kid to the public school and trust they're going to get a good education. You're supposed to be able to walk home from the store with a bag of Skittles in your pocket and not worried about getting shot dead by the person who wants to be the neighborhood watch. So I think, again, you know, time after time after time, you know, we have people who I call racial arsonists. Who like to make people feel bad or somehow think that, you know, we can't achieve equality for black people unless we're tearing somebody down in the process. And I think that the reality is all black people are trying to say is that there was a hole that was dug, and I'm simply asking you to help fill that hole in fully. We've done some of the work. We help us finish the job so that we can stand shoulder to shoulder together on equal ground together.
Yeah, it's good. Obviously. How do we make a distinction, / how do you think about and characterize these extreme, I don't want to say extreme, these terrible things that have happened that we all know about, and the normal day-to-day lives in a white supremacist nation? Like I hear this word lived experience, right? So the lived experience of a black person today. And I think the race baiters and whoever are trying to characterize that as horrible and oppressive and unfair and all the rest. Do you feel like that normal everyday experience of people of color today is oppressive?
Oh, look, I think I just like to throw out this whole white supremacist nation. It's a complete distortion of what we face today as a nation and the problems that we're facing. You think today is a white supremacist nation. You haven't been to South Africa during apartheid. You think this is a white supremacist nation. You haven't lived through what our ancestors have lived through, bondage and all these things. And so I think two things can be true at the same time. We can acknowledge the fact, as I say oftentimes, that, you know, America was a perfect nation founded by imperfect men. And I think the greatness of America is that the men recognized their imperfection and created mechanisms to allow us to always be improving, to always be in pursuit of that more perfect union. And so I think to the point of what we're talking about on a day-to-day basis is saying that, look, we're not talking about, you know, white supremacy run amok. We're talking about white supremacists getting too comfortable. I think that, you know, there was always this understanding that racism in America had a half-life, that every generation was going to get better, that we're going to see less of what we saw before. And so to me, that's why this moment is so important, because when you have people who think they have the freedom to march down the street with tiki torches saying Jews will not replace us in a 2020 America, in a 2017, 2018 America, we should understand that, you know, as Reagan said, that, you know, freedom, you know, loss of freedom is only one generation away, and that we have to fight for it. And I think that every day we have to fight for that freedom, and that freedom doesn't just include our right to go to church in the middle of a corona crisis. That freedom also means that we have to fight for the person that doesn't look like us to make sure they can walk down the street without losing their life with a knee on their neck at the hands of somebody who we've entrusted to enforce the laws that govern us all.
Yeah, you said something a second ago that's interesting. So would you characterize that there's maybe not, I like that term half-life, like racism is a half-life, that's interesting, that there's not maybe more racists, but they're bolder than they've been in the last few decades? Is that the thought?
I think that they're bolder than they've been in a long time, and I think that there are obviously these modern tools that have allowed them to be emboldened.
Yeah. You know, okay, that's right. And people characterize that as there's more of them, when maybe that's not the truth. They're just more accessible and have a platform.
They are more accessible, but also we have to recognize the danger of that accessibility, that there can be a resurgence because there is a way for the white supremacist who lives in Philadelphia, Mississippi, to be able to communicate with that person who's on the brink living in New York City, right? So we have to understand
that makes a lot of sense.
That there is this opportunity now in this new modern era that with every advancement comes a risk. And there is a risk now that in this modern 21st century world, that there can be a flare-up, right? And so again, when you talk about what can we do, what can you do, right? It's about talking to that person you see on the Amtrak who might look different than you and having a conversation. As a nation, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, giving each other the permission to ask questions. I think those are the things that we can do. And I think, again, acknowledging the fact that we can have racism in a society or in a community where no racist is actually present. And I think that if we can actually talk about that in a more concrete way, particularly for me as a Republican, saying that if we say every day that Democrats want to keep their black children trapped in failing schools, not for their benefit, but for the benefit of teachers' unions that don't care about those kids, that we have death sentences basically based on the color of your skin and the zip code in which you live, that when the people who are the victim of that turn around and call that a systemic problem, we should not be up in arms. What we're really saying is the same thing. We're just describing it differently. We call it a systemic political problem. They are calling it a systemic racial problem. But if we call the systemic political problem predicated on the color of their skin, then what is really the difference, right? And so I think instead of us sitting here trying to argue as if we're talking about two different things, recognize the common place that we're coming from and being able to have that conversation in a way that brings people in and doesn't keep us divided.
Okay. All right. We got to talk again, Joseph. I got like a minute here, and there's a million questions. This is unfair. You touched on this a second. So so when Rush Limbaugh says to Charlemagne and the guys there, what do I do? And let's say I do that, right? Hey, so what do I do? And the response is dismantle systematic racism. Like what? You know what I mean? Like what do I do with that, right? Like I want to do something, but like I don't know what that means. What would be a better answer to that? And I love everything you just said there. So maybe even if you just reiterate it, but what is something that I can do?
Where is your sphere of influence, and how can you bring up the perspective of people who have lived a life different than yours to that experience, right? And so I say often, I'm often a brown face in a pale place in many Republican functions, and I'm fine with that. But I think, again, people say, oh, Joe, if I had 5 minutes, let's solve, the problem of, racial disparity within the party. And I said, well, if this was a problem we could solve in 5 minutes, we wouldn't have a problem. But at the same time, I recognize that people are coming from a place of sincerity and earnestness. And so I think if we can just get back to that point, that if you are a person, who works in radio, right, and you're talking about, issues of this nature, well, if you're looking around the studio and there's no one in that studio that looks like the topic of discussion, then maybe there is something that can be done there. If you're somebody who's a teacher talking about educational disparities when it comes to people of color, but there are no people of color in the planning meeting, then maybe we should be talking about that. And I think even as a party, as a Republican Party, when we start talking about what are the solutions for urban America, if there are no people who have actually lived a lifetime in urban America, then let's bring them into the room. That let's start saying that allow people to be present, to allow their presence to have purpose and power and elevate us all.
Yeah, fair. Obviously fair. Joseph, I hate we got to go, man. I'm sorry about that. Can we maybe talk next week or the week after? Because I want to talk about your dad. Can we talk about your dad and his experience in his life? I'd love to hear more about that.
Absolutely. We'd love to do it.
Beautiful. Joseph Pinion III. That's his Twitter. Joseph Pinion, Pinion. You can follow him there. Joseph, appreciate you, man. We'll do it again.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. That's our show. True Story, Mike Slater. We'll do it again tomorrow. Actually, we got our special tomorrow. Exposed Fake News Agenda. We'll talk about the media and how they're manipulating you, and we can rise above. True Story, Mike Slater. Spread the word.